Again, this is Damp, Dewy, Drippy, Moist Ghosts by Jay Wilburn. Even before the violence started, I need a comma there for one thing, he noticed something strange when he showered, and that's not spelled right. There was always a lot of fogging on the mirrors and glass wall of his shower. Patrick Baylor liked his water hot. His skin was often red and tender when he finally stepped out to dry off. And many evenings he didn't move to turn off the water until it started to get cold. Sometimes he wondered if he wasn't trying to burn away the cold blue feelings that hung over his spirit every day. Say, he had money. He was good at investing other people's money, and let's say other people's savings, and even better at investing his own. He wasn't so great at investing in people or relationships, so he found himself alone more often than not. He seemed to go through business partners as fast as he did go through business partners, let's say faster than he did with women. Alright, what else? Patrick didn't consider himself a fool, though. He had decided there was a good chance it was him. He was the problem. How to solve that? Well, that was a knowledge set that eluded him. This was what was on his mind when things got weird in the shower. Alright, that's some ominous writing right there, so let's see what happens with that. There were signs of haunting before, little things that were easy to ignore or justify away without much thought. These things started to jump out of his memory later, say over the coming days. As the situation escalated. But it was that last shower in his expensive home that Sunday he left, the Sunday he would leave. Got some weird tenses going on here. Alright, the Sunday he would leave. Let me try that sentence again. But it was that last shower in his expensive home, the Sunday he would leave, that triggered his fight or flight reaction. His fight or flight reaction. And he wasn't much of a fighter unless he had his opponent at a significant disadvantage. Any of his old girlfriends or partners could attest to that. All right, there we go. The handprints in the moisture formed again. They were large. They were large like man's hands, larger than his. The ring finger of the right invisible hand was bent as if it had been broken and allowed to reset incorrectly. The prints appeared dark in the field of white humidity over the glass. They seemed to press in harder, let's say harder still. Even to the point that the sliding door rattled in its frame. Fat drips of condensation ran down and away from the prints. Patrick grew dizzy as he realized he had stopped breathing. He drew in a deep, hot breath of steam that didn't help him recover his equilibrium. Then he felt as if he were burning up, cooking in the scalding water. All the comfort of that heat turned to weary suffering in his terror. He actually reached out to touch the shape of the hands. Then they slid down the glass, smearing their let's say smearing their perimeter in dark swatches that squeaked loudly down the glass. Fuck this noise, Patrick said as he flung open the door and stumbled through the bathroom naked and soaking wet. He bypassed his towel warmers and kept going. Let me make this the same paragraph. Alrighty. He nearly slipped twice, but kept his feet and tore open the door to his empty bedroom. Part of him thought that if he hesitated or fell, that whatever went with those hands and noises would get him. With the shower still going, he dressed in jeans, a sweatshirt, and sneakers without socks. The clothing clung to his undried body. The whole time he prepared to flee... Let me put a comma there. He watched the steam waft out of the bathroom through the open door. The door open ajar. More than once. Let me put a comma there. He swore he saw the shape of an arm or a leg in the steam. Already, his memory pulled up earlier incidents that now made more sense if something was really there. He grabbed up his wallet and keys from the bedroom and fled, let's just make it from the dresser. From the dresser he shared with no one, and fled with the water still running. Patrick decided to exit through the mudroom so he could turn off the water to the house without having to go in that bathroom again. The valve squeaked and his eyes darted in to every surface, searching for moisture and then searching for signs of unseen hands or fingers painting with the water. He left out the side door and drove away in an expensive foreign car. He'd send someone to see to the house later, but he'd be damned if he was going to be the fool to hang around in a haunted house. He didn't really believe in such things, but he had run away from other situations for far less than this. All right, I like that. Okay, 2 days later, the ghost of Alicia would knock out 2 of his teeth in a pricey hotel suite. Patrick picked himself up off the thick carpet. It was an off brown color that allowed him to easily spot the two chunks of broken enamel and the jelly-like blood strung out between him and them. Between him and the crumbs of his teeth. There we go. He almost sliced his tongue on the broken end of one of those missing teeth, and the air breathed over those exposed sockets and roots stung with agonizing pain. He recognized Alicia pretty quickly, despite the fact that her form was barely there, outlined in droplets of water. It was droplets of water that should not have been hanging in the air. Hanging in space like that. It was as if the features of her face and the faint curves of her body were made from the thin wisps of mist that came out of nowhere. Some private fog gave her enough substance to take knuckles to him. He started to speak, but it hurt too much. She moved before he realized she was coming for him again. Patrick was trying to guard his face as he focused on her transparent fists. Let's say as he tried to focus. On her transparent fists. But she brought a hard, nearly invisible knee up into his chest and drove him backward into the wall. Someone on the other side hammered back, and a muffled voice mumbled out an angry reply that he could not hear, that he could not decipher, let's say. He just heard it, so that's not right. That he could not decipher. The walls here were much thicker than some roadside motel dive. Patrick might be on the run from watery ghosts, but he still had the means to run in style. Alicia, if that's you, please stop. He was already trying to talk. He spoke despite the pain and the feeling that his chest might have been partially caved in. Even if that wasn't what happened, that's certainly how it felt in that moment. All right, there we go. Feel good about that. Alicia, if that's you, please stop. I didn't even know you were dead. I didn't kill you. I had nothing to do with this time. She kicked him in the stomach. He saw her leg move just after much of her upper body vanished from the dissipation of the fog over her ghostly skin. Let's say maybe she was moving too fast for it to hold on. For it to hold to her. Patrick let out a wavering moan. I'm going to make that a new paragraph. There we go. Patrick let out a wavering moan. One of her toes had caught him right in the belly button, and the ill pain from it sunk deep. He doubled over onto his hands and knees. The thick carpet itself, depressed in the shape of her small bare feet, puddled in those indentions. In those indentions, almost like it was leaking up out of the floor itself. Okay, I like that. It also allowed him to track her coming for him again. He didn't need much warning to know that she was coming for more. He twisted his head aside and away. That invisible foot that almost felt soft as it grazed his cheek still caused a terrible rush of pain as she jarred his jaw and his broken teeth. The inside of his cheek sliced deep on the sharp edge of the break. The sensation he noticed the most was how cold that incorporeal, that's not how you spell that, incorporeal foot felt. It was icy, like dead flesh. There we go. All right, Patrick burst into motion, coming up in an unsteady run. He hit the door as he struggled with the locks that now kept him trapped inside instead of protecting him from anything out there. He could not hear her running at his back, but he did hear heavy drops of water plopping on the floor. Let's say as they fell from nothing. Patrick loosed the final lock and tore out of the room, charging headlong down the hall without his shoes on. He heard the thump behind him and dared to turn. A long, wet splotch formed on the upper door near the hinges, where he could still partially see into the room. Water sheeted down the door's face, onto the threshold between the open room and the carpet. Patrick decided to bypass the elevator and run down the stairs instead. He'd drive as far away from here as he could, but he'd still be found a couple days later. All right. Alicia was still alive. He called her. She wasn't happy to hear from him. They'd had a nasty breakup, but nothing that could have ended in haunting. Again, the fact that she was alive seemed to preclude it. He had to be mistaken. It wasn't her. He had only caught a glimpse in what the mists had revealed to him, but he had been so sure at the time, sitting in his car on the outer edge of the department store parking lot. Patrick packed more of the white powder into his damaged teeth. He had the money to take care of it for real, but he didn't know what city to take care of his damaged teeth for real. But he didn't know what city he would be in. Next. And something told him. No, I don't need that there. Something told him he didn't want to be sedated in a chair next to sharp instruments when the wet ghost decided to visit again. Is it ghosts, plural? When the wet ghost, let's say ghost or ghosts, decided to visit again. Nope, that's not what I want to say. When the next wet ghost, because he's aware that he's had two different visitations, so in his mind it may be a different ghost every time. When the next wet ghost decided to visit again, he imagined the spirits using the liquid of the dentist's spit sink to form themselves and then to tear him apart. His jaw and gums numbed with a buzz that caused his heart to race. He was using more than he should, but there was no prescription for this stuff. Tooth pain was nothing to screw with, though. This stuff helped, but barely. He watched 2 drops trail down the outside of his windshield. Through the morning dew. He had not slept much the night before. He wasn't sure that running made any difference, but he hated to sit still long enough to find out otherwise. All right. As he reached for the wiper switch to clear the window, his hand froze in midair. Is midair one word? Well, yes, it is. Fear boiled up inside him, either as a warning or as a realization that he was surrounded by fogged windows. 4 handprints, small like those of young women, formed in the moisture right in front of his face, much like the bigger hands had done on his shower nearly a week earlier. Patrick panicked and scrambled. He tried to turn on the car, the wipers, and the defrost all at once, but succeeded in doing none of those things. He let out a long, deep breath as he tried again for the keys hanging from the ignition. He could see his breath like it was a cold day, but the car's interior was actually stuffy from trying to sleep in there over the last few hours. The single breath turned into a foggy storm. Let me fix that. That wavered back and forth between the seat and blocked out all the between the seats. Let's make that plural. And blocked out all the world outside. There were 2 of them, both women, both formed out of the supernatural mist that filled the interior of the car that never used to smell this bad. He didn't want to look at them. He just wanted to get away. But unlike the ghost who wasn't Alicia, this pair of spirits stood out in dark relief against the fog that surrounded them. Their faces were as clear as sculptures, but these stony faces moved and twisted as they sneered at him. All right. They were stark naked in the negative space that formed in the drifting haze. Every curve and detail was crystal clear as the invisible fingers curled into threatening claws. And like before, he was sure he recognized them. It was harder to deny, though. Even if he didn't recall the details of their bodies, their faces were undeniable. It was Stephanie and Mackenzie. They didn't know each other as far as he knew, and there was no natural way they could track him here. But of course, these manifestations were anything but natural. Like Alicia's spirit from the hotel room when he lost 2 teeth, he had no reason to think these 2 were dead either, although now he suspected that might not matter. "I'm sorry," he shouted a little too loudly for the closed car. "I didn't mean to hurt either of you. Whatever I did, I'm sorry." Instead of soothing them, this rushed apology seemed to set them off. They both lunged at him and tore into his face and throat. He pawed at the door lock, but Mackenzie seized him by the wrists and pinned his fists against his chest with more strength than he imagined she had in life. Stephanie slipped a cord. Okay, hold on. Her fingers were corpse cold and as wet as melting ice. There we go. Stephanie slipped a cord over his head, tucked it up under his chin, and then pulled it taut with an audible strain from the material. His airway wasn't completely closed, but spotty darkness mixed with his vision of the drifts of mist passing between his bulging eyes and the textured ceiling of the car. He could feel Mackenzie's weight straddling his lap. Cords stood out on his neck where he was pinned to the seat by the spirit of Steph strangling him from the back. He started to go. Let's say his consciousness started to go started to slip. And might well have and he might well have blacked out had Mac not sunk her ghostly teeth into his shoulder, drawing warm blood. Patrick fought and twisted in her ethereal grip without much strength behind it. Behind, let's say, his efforts. But the condensation that formed the surface of her palms and fingers was slippery enough for him to twist and slide. Just, let's say, instead of enough, we'll say just a bit. He freed his hand and pulled the cord from the divot forming in his throat. Just, let's not say divot, let's say furrow. From the furrow forming in his throat, just enough to loop it over his head. Mackenzie clawed at him some more, but he got the door unlocked and opened before sliding out from under her weight. Patrick tumbled across the asphalt and felt it in his teeth again. In his broken teeth again. He needed another application of his special medicine, but he wasn't going back in there again. But he wasn't going back in there to get it. All right. He needed no second lessons to know to stay away from haunted things. As his pulse hammered inside his abused throat and skull, he spied Mackenzie on her knees in his driver's seat, growling at him silently. Steph still held the cord in her moist hands in the back seat. It was a striped bungee cord he had used for securing a mountain bike to the back of his vehicle when he took up that hobby for a few months last year. He had apparently left it there for any angry ghost that wanted him dead. Steph wasn't alone in the back. Clear as day, clearer than in the hotel room, Alicia sat with her legs crossed and reclined as if she were enjoying the show, the ghost of a woman who was most assuredly not yet dead. Patrick turned and ran diagonally through the lot. A couple early shoppers honked, others on the sidewalk paused to watch him go. Then someone grabbed him. Patrick screamed and tried to struggle, but the officer wrestled him to the ground. Patrick groaned as the pain of the impact focused itself in his broken teeth. Before the officer searched his vehicle, he was sure the wet ghost would be long gone, but the powder in the glove compartment would be right there. Patrick knew enough to say nothing, but that got him stuck in a large room, say a large locked room, with other drunk, high, hungover, and stinking men. He had his own lawyers, so didn't need a poor public defender, but he had covered a lot of miles and would have to wait a while for the best money could buy to get out to him. The next ghost that swirled into naked existence was a burly old man instead of one of his past wronged girlfriends. Buck Hansen had a bent ring finger from a machine accident when he was a kid. The stark detail of the myths around Buck... around Buck were more than Patrick cared to see. Let's make this the same paragraph. All right. A few others looked up and squinted at what they must have thought was a hallucination, because what else could it be? Let me put a question mark there. Hey, Joe, thank you for the follow. I appreciate it. All right. When they looked to each other and saw recognition on others' faces, they started to really get concerned. Buck trailed wet footprints as he approached Patrick on the bench. Whispers spread through the room. "What the hell were you doing in my shower, Buck?" Patrick's words slurred from the swelling around his mouth and face. The officers who arrested him attributed his injuries to self-affliction and drug abuse, since he clearly was high and out of his mind, as the blood tests would, let's say, no doubt confirm. All right. It would be hard to explain that bite mark on his shoulder, though. This ghost answered, and though the words could be made out, they sounded... All right, let me put an ED there. They sounded like someone had learned to talk while gargling water. "You're doing this to yourself." Men scattered from both sides of Patrick. A few fights broke out as frightened prisoners who had not yet noticed the watery ghost objected to being bumped and stepped on. Others cursed as they saw Buck's outline in the cleared portion of the holding cell. "They're not even dead," Patrick said. "Neither are you. You're locked up. You did it to yourself. You knew the risks. You can't blame me." His partner, who should have been locked away in a more private cell hundreds... Let me put the S on the end of that. Hundreds of miles away, gargled out, "I'm not doing this. You are punishing yourself. Then I command you to go away." The ghost... ghost growled, and water spattered on the growing puddle, let's say. In the home stretch here, I just want to get it right. In the growing puddle in front of the bench, Patrick now had to himself. The room was awash of shouting and noise from all the men crowded against the opposing wall and far corners. Men who had looked so dangerous seconds ago seemed to be paralyzed with fear now. A few stood on benches and screamed in much higher registers. Officers banged on the outside of the metal door and shouted for the inmates to clear out. They did not move from their spots as they watched Patrick talk with the ghost. All this noise made Buck harder to hear and understand. But the ghost said, "You brought me here." The doors flung open and a half-dozen officers came in swinging. The prisoners did not resist. They hardly looked at the officers at all. Then even the cops stopped in place and stared. A body made of water and flooding the cell. I'll say flooding out the cell. Out the cell held Patrick Baylor against the wall with his feet dangling over the wet floor. The ghostly tower. Yeah, okay. The ghostly tower of water seemed to be growing and seemed to be growling and slamming the back of Patrick's head against the wall over and over, long after Patrick had blacked out and a spattery smear of blood and hair spread out on the wall behind him.